the frigid confines of the Tower of London, a teenage queen rehearsed how to die. Just 19 years old, Catherine Howard, who had worn the English crown for scarcely a year and a half, spent her final hours practicing the act of laying her head on the executioner's block. Her resolve was clear. She would face death with composure, not the panic that had accompanied her imprisonment. But what kind of offense could justify such a terrible fate for someone so young? The answer lies not solely in her supposed infidelities, but in the merciless machinery of Henry VIII's court, where youth and beauty were tools expendable and easily replaced. Catherine's fate is among the most tragic in Tudor history, shedding light on the brutal reality of life under one of England's most fearsome rulers. Born around 1523 into the prestigious Howard family, she was thrust into a court where women were pawns for dynastic ambition, their lives traded for influence. Her short-lived tenure as Henry's fifth consort culminated in charges of high treason, brutal interrogations of her companions, and finally, her execution on a bitter February morning in 1542. But this is no ordinary tale of courtly betrayal. It's a glimpse into the unforgiving system of Tudor justice where confessions were often extracted under duress, the innocent sacrificed for political preservation, and where the king's insecurities turned affection into mortal peril. The closing chapter of Catherine Howard's life illustrates the steep human toll of Henry VIII's tyranny and how absolute power could swiftly extinguish innocent lives. England in 1540 was a realm gripped by religious turmoil and political repression. Henry VIII, now entering his late 40s, had already severed ties with the Catholic Church, dissolved the monasteries, and dispatched 2 wives to their death soul in the obsessive pursuit of a male heir. His court had become a battleground of rival factions, each maneuvering through the unpredictable whims and growing paranoia of their sovereign. The Howards, among England's most established noble houses, saw a chance to reclaim their influence by placing their young relative Catherine before the aging monarch. Henry's chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, had just arranged a disastrous union with Anne of Cleves, a German princess Henry found repugnant. Sensing an opportunity, the Howard faction by the powerful Duke of Norfolk began to present Catherine as a suitable alternative. They knew Henry's appetite for youth and vitality, hoping she would reignite his sense of masculinity, despite his physical decay and the putrid ulcers on his legs that made him more grotesque than gallant. The timing favored the Howard ambitions. With Cromwell's downfall imminent, conservative factions looked to Catherine, whose Catholic ties and striking appearance seemed to promise a reversal of the sweeping Protestant reforms. Yet, in their political gamble, they overlooked the king's deteriorating mental state and his growing readiness to obliterate anyone who challenged his authority or bruised his ego. In 1540, England was a realm paralyzed by fear, a place where spies lurked in every corner. Casual remarks could be distorted into charges of treason, and an unexpected knock at the door might mean arrest or worse. The royal court resembled a gilded prison, where noblemen and women exchanged pleasantries laced with manipulation, and the king's volatile temper could transform royal favor into a death sentence overnight. Catherine Howard's early life was defined by abandonment and misplaced trust factors that would ultimately determine her tragic destiny. With her father absent from her upbringing, she was placed in the household of her step-grandmother, Agnes Howard, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. Her time at Chesworth House, followed by Horsham, was meant to instill grace and moral discipline befitting a noble lady. Instead, these households became places where boundaries vanished and youthful naivety was left unprotected. The Dowager Duchess, elderly and absorbed in her own preoccupations, provided minimal oversight, allowing the young girls in her care to operate without constraint. Catherine shared living quarters with older girls who, knowingly or otherwise, exposed her to flirtations, clandestine messages, and ideas of romance far too advanced for her tender age. It was here that Catherine first learned the value of secrecy, the exchange of letters, and the subtle codes of aristocratic life. Her first emotional entanglement came with Henry Mannix, her music instructor, a man several years older, who may have fostered an improper closeness. That early connection revealed how affection could be misunderstood or exploited. After Manox, Catherine formed a deeper relationship with Francis Derham, a gentleman attached to the Duchess's service. Their involvement intensified with private endearments and mutual pledges, including what several later described as a vow of marriage. The girls' dormitory at Horsham became a haven for quiet confessions and hidden aspirations, where young women whispered their dreams and pursued forbidden encounters. Witnesses would later recount a household marked by lenient discipline and unchecked behavior, where romantic meetings were frequent and guardians routinely ignored the signs. These formative experiences, products of oversight rather than corruption, were later weaponized by her political foes as evidence of moral weakness. Moments that should have been protected by adult guidance became the very foundation for the charges that ultimately destroyed her. The investigation that led to Catherine Howard's execution did not begin in the palace halls, but in the long-forgotten secrets of a girl raised in shadows, a web of deception that would ultimately lead to her execution. The investigation that sealed Catherine Howard's fate didn't begin with her actions as queen, but rather through a methodical probe into her background. What emerged was a portrait of neglectful guardianship and a history of intimate connections that, while not unusual for young noblewomen of her era, proved damning when reframed within the charged atmosphere of Tudor scandal. These youthful relationships would become the cornerstone of the charges brought against her. By the year 1540, Catherine had drawn the gaze of Henry VIII, but the path to queenship was strewn with the wreckage of his earlier unions and the remains literal and reputational of those who had disappointed or defied him. Henry's approach to marriage had become disturbingly routine. A whirlwind of obsession, hasty nuptials, followed by either annulment or execution when the queen failed to provide a male heir or his affection cooled. Catherine's ascent came at a time when the aging king was particularly susceptible to charm and the illusion of vitality. His fourth marriage, to Anne of Cleves, had been a debacle from the beginning. Upon meeting his bride, whom he mockingly referred to as his Flanders mare, Henry was repulsed. Their marriage remained unconsummated, and he quickly sought its dissolution so he could pursue someone more to his liking. The Howard family knew how to exploit the king's temperament. They had already offered up Anne Boleyn, Catherine's cousin, who had paid with her life for failing to bear a son. Now, the family was prepared to gamble again, believing that Catherine's youthful charm might succeed where Anne had failed. Her uncle, the powerful Duke of Norfolk, oversaw her strategic placement within the royal household. Appointed as a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves, Catherine was positioned directly under the king's nose. At the moment his dissatisfaction peaked, her liveliness, physical beauty, and air of unspoiled innocence contrasted sharply with the aloof and foreign queen Henry was eager to cast aside. The king's courtship of Catherine was both pitiful and chilling, desperate bid by a deteriorating monarch to reclaim his youth by pursuing a girl not yet out of adolescence, now morbidly obese, plagued by ulcerated legs, and prone to uncontrollable rages. Henry lavished her with gifts, delighted by her seeming admiration despite his physical decay. Catherine, scarcely 17, and unaware of the full weight of the political machinations surrounding her, found herself swept into the obsession of England's most dangerous man. The Howard family carefully coached her response, teaching her to flirt just enough, to appear sweet yet clever, and above all, to remember the ultimate aim: a crown on her head and a resurgence of Howard influence. The king's swift transition from annulment to remarriage with Catherine exposed just how deeply his desire clouded his judgment. Rational thought had no place once Henry's passions had been ignited. Just weeks after the annulment of Henry's previous marriage, Catherine Howard was crowned Queen of England, a role that offered immense privilege, but also lethal risk. The wedding, held in July 1540, followed closely on the heels of the king's separation from Anne of Cleves. What should have been a joyful occasion carried the ominous weight of history. The 19-year-old bride was marrying a monarch nearly 3 decades her senior, a man whose wives had previously met with annulments. Disgrace, or the act. The Howard family rejoiced at their renewed political influence, while Catherine herself seemed unaware of the fatal pattern she was stepping into. The opening chapter of her queenship unfolded smoothly. Henry, energized by the attentions of his youthful bride, appeared more content than he had in years. He lavished her with extravagant gifts, including jewelry once worn by former queens, a disturbing tradition that revealed the king's emotional detachment from the women he had left behind. Catherine threw herself into her duties with youthful enthusiasm, reveling in the pageantry, luxurious garments, and the influence her status afforded. She used her new position to advocate for prisoners, some of whom had been condemned for their religious views, displaying a compassion that won her early favor among courtiers. Yet the very traits that drew Henry to her also became liabilities in the treacherous environment of Tudor politics. Her innocence and lack of political experience made her susceptible to manipulation by those seeking advantage, and her cheerful, open demeanor was often mistaken for flirtation by men eager to exploit any perceived opening. Meanwhile, the king's physical and mental condition worsened dramatically. His ulcerated legs had become so infected that their foul odor was impossible to ignore, and his weight had increased to the point that he needed mechanical devices simply to mount a horse. These afflictions fed an ever-deepening paranoia and volatility, making him a dangerous figure to displease. Catherine's failure to conceive quickly became a cause for concern, especially for her ambitious family. The pressure to bear a son was immense, as 2 of Henry's wives had already been executed after failing in that regard. Her inability to produce an heir cast a shadow over her marriage and heightened the scrutiny she faced. Her royal household, like all Tudor courts, swarmed with informers and spies, many of whom reported to rival factions rather than the queen herself. Catherine's words, gestures, and relationships were all monitored, parsed for any hint of impropriety or betrayal. Even her most private spaces were not her own, as servants loyal to others listened, watched, and relayed every detail to those waiting for a misstep. The fatal entanglement that would ultimately lead to Catherine Howard's destruction took the form of Thomas Culpeper, a courtier in the king's privy chamber, whose charm and access to the queen made him dangerously appealing to a young bride trapped in a deteriorating royal marriage. Culpeper, close to Catherine in age and radiating the health and vitality her husband had long since lost, embodied everything her union with Henry lacked. Their bond began modestly fleeting conversations and meaningful glances that gradually deepened into something far more perilous. As a trusted member of the king's inner household, Culpeper enjoyed frequent access to royal quarters, which he leveraged to cultivate a relationship that both he and Catherine must have known carried deadly risks. Facilitating their covert meetings was Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford. Having survived the downfall of the Boleyn dynasty, one might have expected her to be cautious, especially given her marriage to George Boleyn, executed alongside his sister Anne. Yet Jane willingly played the role of intermediary, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to another queen's ruin. Catherine's letters to Culpeper, penned in her own handwriting, would later serve as damning evidence at her trial. More than mere expressions of affection, they revealed an emotional intensity that could easily be construed as disloyalty to the crown. In one such letter, she confessed, "It makes my heart to die to think what fortune I have that I cannot be always in your company," a line prosecutors would later frame as proof of betrayal and adultery. Their rendezvous occurred in various locations, from the Queen's private chambers to secluded areas during the royal progress. Elaborate precautions were taken. Coded messages, secret messengers, and tightly timed meetings, all of which would eventually be seen as signs of deliberate planning rather than innocent affection. Culpeper's motives remain somewhat ambiguous. Whether he truly loved the Queen, sought influence, or was simply enthralled by the danger of the affair, his behavior reflected a bold disregard for the lethal consequences that awaited any man who dared dishonor the king. Over the course of several months, their relationship escalated the cautious beginnings, giving way to increasingly risky encounters and emotionally charged correspondence. Caught up in passion and secrecy, both lovers seemed to lose awareness of the peril surrounding them. In October 1541, the trap began to close. The specter of Catherine's past, long buried but never erased, would resurface and spark the investigation that would bring everything crashing down. The exposure of Catherine Howard's former lovers and her current affair didn't arise from meticulous inquiry, but rather through the opportunistic actions of John Lascelles, a Protestant reformer, who saw a chance to weaken the powerful Catholic Howard faction by revealing the Queen's past. Lascelles confided in Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and a key figure among the reformers, providing details through his sister, Mary Hall, who had once served in the Dowager Duchess's household and had first-hand knowledge of Catherine's entanglements with both Henry Manox and Francis Derham. The timing could not have been more disastrous. Henry was basking in what he perceived to be a blissful marriage. Cranmer found himself facing a grim choice: report these serious accusations and risk unleashing another deadly royal scandal, or withhold the information and risk being branded disloyal. Seeking a middle ground, he opted to submit the allegations in a discreet letter to the king, allowing Henry to absorb the news privately. The king's initial response was a mixture of shock and rage. He could not accept that the wife he believed to be devoted had so thoroughly deceived him. His first reaction was to direct his wrath at Cranmer. But as additional details surfaced, Henry's shock hardened into the icy fury he had previously shown toward wives he believed had betrayed him. What followed was a grimly familiar spectacle. A cold, calculated investigation carried out with the same ruthless efficiency seen in previous royal purges. Derham and Manox were quickly detained and subjected to horrific torture. Under excruciating pressure, they confessed to intimate relationships with Catherine, describing events that dated back to her early teenage years and presenting her as an active, willing participant. Soon after, Thomas Culpeper was apprehended. His statements under interrogation admitted to secret meetings with the Queen, though he insisted that they had not become lovers. Whether this denial was true or simply an attempt to reduce his punishment while enduring torture remains unknown. Lady Rochford, Jane Boleyn, was also arrested. Her role in orchestrating the secret encounters between Catherine and Culpeper became central to the case. Her testimony revealed how carefully the affair had been hidden and how deeply she had been involved in enabling it. Her admissions played a pivotal role in portraying the affair as deliberate and pre-planned. Catherine's formal imprisonment began on the 14th of November, 1541, when she was placed under house arrest in her private quarters. As the inquiry deepened, only months earlier, she had been the radiant focus of court festivities and royal affection. Now, she was confined and cut off from nearly everyone. A handful of loyal servants were allowed to remain, but the isolation and conditions of her captivity were deliberately designed to wear her down, to compel her into confessing, fully and irrevocably. Catherine Howard was cut off from the outside world, denied writing materials, and barred from any communication beyond her tightly controlled household. Her interrogators, the King's Commissioners, applied relentless psychological pressure. It was a campaign of mental torment, as deliberate and calculated as any physical coercion. Her emotional state unraveled swiftly. Eyewitnesses described her swinging between uncontrollable sobbing and frozen, speechless silence, unable to grasp the scale of her downfall. Once a queen with access to the full power of the English crown, she now lacked control over even the most basic elements of her life. The questioning extended beyond her affair with Thomas Culpeper. Investigators delved deep into her past, scrutinizing every prior relationship and fixating on her failure to disclose them before marrying the king. Central to their inquiries was whether Catherine had pledged herself in a formal betrothal to Francis Derham, a promise that, under canon law, could render her subsequent marriage to Henry unlawful and treasonous. Catherine's answers under interrogation were inconsistent, often contradictory, revealing not deception but emotional collapse and legal ignorance. Young and poorly educated, she had no way to understand the complex legal trap closing around her. What she once believed to be personal indiscretions were now being weaponized as charges of high treason. Her physical condition also worsened. She became gaunt, plagued by sleeplessness, and developed tremors so severe her hands shook constantly. These signs of stress were recorded meticulously by her captors. Even her physical suffering was interpreted as confirmation of her guilt. As the proceedings wore on, it became evident that the outcome had already been decided. Given Henry's brutal handling of previous wives accused of betrayal, there was little hope for leniency. The only unknown was whether Catherine would be spared a public death or face execution. in the most humiliating fashion available to the crown. The legal process that would seal Catherine's fate followed a chillingly efficient path. Parliament was convened to draft a bill of attainder, a legislative death sentence that eliminated the need for a trial, thereby stripping Catherine of any opportunity to defend herself. This method, while technically legal, was a gross distortion of England's judicial norms, crafted to give the king absolute authority in matters he deemed politically sensitive. Catherine would not face judgment by a court of law, but by a parliament fully beholden to the king's desires. The charges against her were written with precision, designed to ensure her elimination while preserving the king's image. She was accused of failing to disclose previous sexual relations, committing adultery with Culpeper, and, through her actions, imagining the king's death a crime classified as treason under Tudor law. The case against Catherine Howard was built on confessions from her former lovers, obtained under torture, her own letters to Thomas Culpeper, and the accounts of servants who had observed or assisted in arranging their secret meetings. This collection of evidence was framed as proof of a calculated betrayal, not only of Henry VIII, but of the English crown itself. Both Culpeper and Francis Derham were separately tried and found guilty, their sentences reflecting the harshest penalties for treason: hanging, drawing, and quartering. Culpeper, possibly spared by his rank or lingering royal favor, was granted the relative mercy of a swift beheading. Derham, however, endured the full horrors of the traitor's execution. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, posed a unique legal dilemma. She appeared to have suffered a total psychological collapse during her captivity. Under common law, those deemed insane were typically exempt from execution. To bypass this obstacle, Parliament enacted a special statute declaring that mental illness did not exempt one from being punished for treason, thus removing any legal protection and clearing the way for her death sentence to be carried out. The Bill of Attainder against Catherine sailed through both houses of Parliament with no resistance. By this stage, no one dared defend a queen already condemned by the king. The speed and unanimity with which the bill passed reflected Parliament's absolute obedience to Henry's authority. Catherine Howard's final days at the Tower of London offered a chilling glimpse into both the brutality of Tudor justice and the quiet strength of a condemned queen. On the 10th of February, 1542, she was brought to the same chambers where Anne Boleyn had awaited execution 6 years earlier, a calculated act meant to haunt her with the legacy of another fallen queen. Sir John Gage, the Tower's lieutenant, was ordered to balance protocol with precaution, showing Catherine due deference while ensuring she could neither escape nor take her own life before the sentence was carried out. The result was an eerie blend of civility and silent dread. To the surprise of many who had known her only as a light-hearted young woman obsessed with courtly pleasures, Catherine approached her final days with remarkable poise. She devoted herself to prayer, reflected deeply on her fate, and prepared her soul for death. Her most haunting request was to have the executioner's block brought to her chamber so that she could rehearse the proper way to position herself. This unsettling preparation reflected her wish to face death with grace, avoiding the panic and chaos that had marred the final moments of some previous queens. She reportedly spent hours ensuring that she could kneel and align herself precisely, sparing the executioner any difficulty. Denied pen and paper, Catherine dictated her final letters to her attendants. In them, she conveyed heartfelt regret for her past mistakes while still protesting her innocence on the gravest allegations, a tragic farewell marked by humility, resolve, and quiet dignity. Catherine Howard acknowledged her mistake in failing to reveal her prior relationships before her marriage, but firmly denied any adultery during her time as queen or participation in any plot against the king's life. In her final days, she also made requests on behalf of her household, asking that her attendants be looked after following her execution and expressing heartfelt thanks for their loyalty during her imprisonment. This unexpected compassion and maturity stood in contrast to the carefree image she had projected during her brief tenure as queen. On the night of the 12th of February, 1542, Catherine was told that her execution would occur the next morning. She declined food, but accepted the comfort of the clergy who remained with her, spending her last hours in quiet prayer and contemplation. Her calm acceptance of her fate during those final hours would come to define the most admirable chapter of her short, tragic life. Catherine Howard was executed at dawn on the 13th of February, 1542, in a manner typical of Henry VIII's cold and clinical approach to eliminating those who had fallen from favor. But what distinguished this execution was the incredible composure of a 19-year-old girl confronting her death with stoic bravery. The early timing of the execution was chosen to limit the crowd and avoid any display of public sympathy. She was brought to the scaffold inside the Tower of London, the very same platform where Anne Boleyn had perished 6 years earlier. The headsman had been summoned from France, known for his precision and ability to deliver a swift, clean execution. Witnesses included officials of the Tower, delegates of the Crown, and a select group of nobles required by tradition to attend. Catherine's personal maids were also permitted to be present, and it is through their recollections that we gain the clearest picture of her final moments. Dressed in a black velvet gown and a white headdress, Catherine ascended the scaffold with poise, her movements calm and unshaken. Her practiced placement of her head on the block showed how thoroughly she had prepared, and even those who had come expecting disgrace were struck by her dignity. Her final words were brief and followed the expected formalities. She admitted her faults, requested prayers for her soul, and pardoned those who had sealed her fate. She made no plea for clemency and offered no protest of innocence, fully aware that such appeals would do nothing to alter her destiny and might only extend her suffering. The execution was carried out with a single expert blow. The French executioner performed his task with the precision that had earned him his role. Catherine's ordeal, months of fear, confinement, and psychological torment, ended in an instant. She was buried without ceremony in an unmarked grave in the Tower Chapel, resting alongside Anne Boleyn and other casualties of the king's merciless marital policies. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, was executed shortly thereafter, her death marking the final chapter in the unraveling of the court scandal that had engulfed them all. Her execution, carried out despite signs of mental instability, revealed the extreme lengths to which Henry VIII was willing to go to eliminate anyone associated with his queen's supposed betrayal. Catherine Howard's death marked the collapse of the Howard family's brief resurgence at court. Her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, would eventually face a death sentence of his own for treason, spared only by the king's death the night before his scheduled execution. Their repeated entanglements in courtly scandals had finally tested even Henry's patience beyond endurance. The ruthless precision of Catherine's downfall and the systematic eradication of all those linked to her alleged offenses laid bare the true nature of Henry's rule. This was not justice, but a stark display of unchecked royal power, where personal humiliation or jealousy could justify the execution of a teenager whose worst crime may have been falling in love with a peer. The shockwaves from Catherine Howard's beheading reverberated across England, serving as a grim warning to anyone who might offend or disappoint the king, or become ensnared in the deadly web of royal matrimony. The swift and total destruction of his fifth wife sent a chilling signal about the cost of betrayal, whether real or imagined. Parliament, having unhesitatingly approved the Bill of Attainder that condemned her without trial, moved quickly to confront the fallout from Henry's latest failed marriage. New legislation was enacted, making it treason for any woman to marry the monarch without first fully disclosing her sexual past. A law that exposed the deep paranoia and distrust at the heart of Henry's relationships with women. Religious consequences also followed in the wake of Catherine's demise. Her Catholic kin had hoped her influence would restore traditional faith practices, but her disgrace only bolstered the Protestant reformers, many of whom had played a direct role in orchestrating her ruin. The disgrace of the Howards turned into a political win for those promoting England's departure from Rome. Henry's reaction to Catherine's execution was predictably cold and self-exonerating. Rather than expressing any sorrow over the death of his young wife, he portrayed himself as the deceived party, the victim of female cunning and papist manipulation. His ability to paint himself as wronged while ordering the beheading of a 19-year-old girl highlighted the moral emptiness at the heart of his reign. Catherine's fate shaped the king's approach to his next marriage. His eventual union with Catherine Parr was preceded by meticulous vetting, driven by a newfound obsession with ensuring moral uprightness. Parr's older age and strong Protestant beliefs made her a safer choice, unlikely to repeat the romantic indiscretions that had doomed her predecessors. The impact on English society was lasting and profound. Catherine's downfall served as a harsh reminder that no title, family name, or royal favor could protect someone who had fallen out of the king's good graces. Her tragic end became a symbol of how absolute the monarch's authority had become, and how terrifyingly little power even the noblest subjects truly held. The nobility had come to understand a chilling truth. Noble blood and royal marriage offered no defense against the fury of Henry VIII. This realization created a court climate defined by fear and absolute obedience, a mood that would dominate the remainder of the king's rule. The legacy of Catherine Howard's execution has continued to shift over time, as historians re-examine her life through more critical and nuanced lenses. The long-accepted portrayal of her as a reckless adulteress responsible for her own demise has been increasingly questioned. Modern feminist historians have reframed Catherine's life as a tragic case of exploitation and systemic abuse, a narrative that begins with predatory relationships in her adolescence and ends with her state-sanctioned execution by a tyrannical spouse. This interpretation highlights the dramatic power imbalances she endured, and the fact that real consent was likely impossible in her dealings with older, more dominant men. The debate over Catherine's guilt remains unresolved. Her earlier romantic encounters are well established, but the claim of adultery with Thomas Culpeper is far less certain. While her letters to him express deep emotion, they stop short of admitting a sexual relationship. Culpeper's confession, extracted under torture, may have been shaped more by self-preservation than truth. Scholars today broadly condemn the legal process used to seal Catherine's fate. Rather than a formal trial, She was condemned through a parliamentary bill of attainder, denying her the chance to defend herself. The acceptance of torture-based testimony and the creation of retroactive laws tailored to her case expose how Tudor justice could be twisted to serve the king's personal agenda. Catherine's experiences have also been reconsidered within the framework of child sexual abuse. Many historians now agree that her relationships with Henry Mannix and Francis Derham, begun when she was still a minor, would be classified as statutory rape today. Her actions as queen, then, are better seen not as promiscuity, but as the legacy of trauma and manipulation. The broader meaning of Catherine Howard's story stretches beyond her individual suffering. Her life offers a stark illustration of how women in Tudor England were objectified, their bodies and sexuality treated as instruments of political ambition and tightly controlled by male guardians, spouses, and the monarchy itself. The continued interest in her tale stems not only from its dramatic twists, but also from its resonance with modern conversations around consent, power dynamics, and systemic injustice. Her meteoric rise and tragic fall offer a haunting lesson in how youthful beauty could elevate a woman to unimaginable heights, only to be weaponized against her when it no longer served the interests of powerful men. Catherine Howard remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of how unchecked power can crush the innocent. Her story is more than a historical curiosity. It is a poignant reminder that behind each historical judgment lies a human life, and that remembering her is not about entertainment, but about honoring the memory of someone whose suffering reveals the true cost of tyranny and systemic oppression.